Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here on a Sunday morning for our panel. When Sameer and I first talked about putting this panel together, Musharraf Ali Faruqi had just published a set of 6 qissas or stories of varying lengths as separate books, both in Urdu and English. Reading through them made me think increasingly of the power invested in women and their state of being in indigenous storytelling genres. Storytelling in its various forms has been used for both pedagogical and non-pedagogical purposes. This panel opens the floor for reimagining the purpose and intent of folk tales and indigenous genres in South Asia, both in their form or forms of telling and in their imaginings of women and men with reference to intimacy, violence, gender, and power. The papers for this seminar work through pre-British colonization narrative genres indigenous to South Asia to partition narratives that are written in more recognizable literary forms. And I hope we can see a pattern in how the characters and their powers have altered and transformed through the centuries, while also looking at how the forms or architectures of telling have altered such characterizations which seem to be in balance in the context of traditional tellings. Without much further ado, I would like to call upon our first speaker, Leon Conrad. Leon Conrad is a polymath based in London, UK, who spent his formative years in the cosmopolitan city of Alexandria, Egypt. He is a storyteller, voice coach, and specialist in story structure. He's brought new insights to the analysis of stories through his application of the work of George Spencer Brown to the analysis of story structure. As outlined in his recently published book, Story and Structure, a Complete Guide, which has won a number of literary awards and has been shortlisted for the People's Book Prize. Thank you, Leon, for joining us. Welcome to the panel, and it's over to you from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mariam, for having me here. It's a great pleasure. I would like to start with a confession. I am not an architect, and I am not a specialist in South Asian culture. I am, however, somebody who knows a little bit about story structure. And the information I want to share with you today is based on the new methodology I put forward in my book, Story and Structure, which is based, as you said, on the work of George Spencer Brown. It is unique in that it looks at story structure at the level of the time of the tale, so the level of fabula, where events happen in chronological order to particular characters, and we follow their storylines, not at the level of the time of the telling, where events can be arranged, the level of sujet. So I want to start with 4 questions, introduce a story structure, look at how it links to a very short extract from a much, much longer Vedic fire altar ritual, and then map the link to common themes that arise in the very fundamental foundational principles of sacred architecture from the region, and then look at how that relates to themes of imbalance in the natural order that link to the themes of this panel. So we're looking at relational qualities, things like intimacy, violence, things that draw us together, bring us apart, and power dynamics, particularly in folk tales. And I want to look at them not in terms of the context or the context, but simply in terms of patterns which promote or hinder flow. And ask the question, when stories contain extreme violence or taboo elements, what purpose might these serve? And what might an approach based on story structure reveal? If we find that the same elements are present in sacred architecture as they are in story, well, what does this say about story and story structure? In my book, I outline 18 distinct story structures. One story structure is going to be the main thrust of the presentation I'm sharing with you today. It's a key story structure that is dynamic. it moves, it changes, it charts relationships between the character and the environment, the balance between heaven and earth, if you like, cosmic order, internal and external. It comes from China, but it is universal. It underpins every single linear story structure I have found to date. In its original context, it uses the 5 Chinese elements, earth, wood, fire, metal, water, arranged in this format. It's called the Wujing arrangement. There are other arrangements, but this is the Wujing arrangement, and it's the earliest arrangement, I think. We have particular themes related to each of the elements. At the centre we have yin-yang in balance. Heaven and earth are completely balanced. We follow not only the cycle of the seasons and the cardinal points, but also the life cycle of living beings. So in spring the shoot emerges. In summer you have division of the root system and the shoot system, and at every level branching out. Then in the autumn or the fall, fruit falls from the trees, leaves fall, there is a separation, and in winter things return to the source. The water finds its level, dips into the earth, the seed lies dormant, ready to come out in the spring. In the traditional Chinese sense, there is a rising and flourishing of different energies. The rising forms are depicted with these marks from Spencer Brown's methodology, the flourishing with the mark over mark. That's where two things are the same, and this is where they're different. So the rising phases have difference in yin-yang, and the flourishing are all the same. I use these symbols to show where we are in the drawings. They're very intuitive. They're in addition to the 6 basic symbols I use to map story structures. We go on to this very short excerpt from a much larger ritual that takes several days, setting up a fire altar. And there are just 3 verses. I've arranged them like this to map them to the Chinese circular structure. The first verse invokes Indra to bring Agni forth, to lead him forward. In the second verse, Indra is asked to bring Agni to the fore, therefore uniting him with the other gods but dividing him from them at the same time. And the third verse, he's exalted. They support him in exalted him, and therefore separating him from them. And at the end of each verse there's an exclamation, Svaha, which reunites us with the source, and it's implied when the ritual is successful. If we look at each of these verses, we also see that at a fractal level the structure can be traced through it. Now what I'm going to do is take the point of view of the supplicants, the people who are performing the ritual, and follow their storyline. There's an opening implied. They, the supplicants, ask you, Indra, to lead Agni forward. When Agni is being led forward, there's a division, a kind of inner lack. We need him somewhere, but he isn't there yet. Butter is being offered. And butter not only is a product of a process of separation, but it's also a separation in the fact that it's being given. And unification, the word implies a reconnection with the whole, and that takes us back to the Svaha. The second verse, again from the point of view of the supplicants, we ask Indra. Indra is summoned, and division very often implies leaving a place, or preparing to leave a place, or it can be an avoidance of division, wanting to make someone whole. So if he's ruling his fellows, that's the desire, then they want him to be united with the gods but divided, and make sure that the gods' shares go to the gods, so everything is separated correctly, and when it is, there will be blessing. There's a reconnection with the source. Similarly, with the third verse, we who are seeking to restore balance, but that's implied, who are making the offering in Agni's house, so we've left our house and going to Agni's, ask the gods to exalt and assist both him and the Lord of Brahman. The exaltation, the act of exaltation, separates Agni, lifts him up, and that on earth creates an avoidance of separation. It unites things so that balance can be restored and there's a reconnection with the source. As a result, when the ritual is successful, balance can be restored. This ties into many of the foundational principles I've found through the work of Adrian Snodgrass to be absolutely at the core of the construction of Hindu temples, particularly. He also shows it to be part of the ritual thinking around Buddhist temples, Islamic, Christian and Roman and indigenous sacred buildings as well. There's a demarcation of the site based on the length of shadows at that particular site. When a circle is drawn and from that a square is drawn, positioned along the north-south and east-west axes, that marks out the cardinal points. So you have the circular and the square, just as in the Chinese circular structure. That gives you the positions of the days that fall on the equinoxes and the solstices. So it marks out not just space but time as well. And there is, he says, a six-armed cross that governs the expanse of the building, not just in time but also in space. Now, in stories, you have a character manifest. Imagine them at the centre of this six-armed cross. If you're in a state of doubt, you're internally divided. You could move forward, you could move backward. You're not sure where to go. You're investigating. Once you establish what the situation is, you have options. On the one hand, on the other, you're moving left and right. Then, when you judge that something is, and you see it as what it is, and something is not, and you see it as what is not, you can then judge whether that thing is good or bad, and then you're on the vertical axis. You're reintegrating and bringing things into balance. At the top of the sacred temple is the stationary sun. We see the sun move around the earth, and yet the stationary sun is at the center of the solar system. We hold that dichotomy in balance, just like yin and yang. So, as we can see, relational qualities and the need for balance are at the heart of story, at the heart of sacred architecture, at the heart of life itself. I believe that when stories contain extreme elements, their purpose is to hold up a mirror that we can objectively look at and come to terms with a sense of imbalance so that we can more easily bring things into balance. As you've seen through the application of just one of a whole example drawn from a much larger study of story structure, there are fundamental parallels. So if the elements that are found in story can also be found in very ancient Vedic texts and in the foundational structure or approach to building a sacred building, then for me, story is life. Both are sacred, and story is a temple of words. I'll leave it there. I hope this will invite further discussion. I look forward to hearing the rest of the presentations.
Great. Thank you, Leon.